privileges in life. Sit back, feel the breeze, relax, and we'll finish the second section of the guidebook. Our topic today is privilege. I want to pause before our recap. I intentionally pushed back privilege as far back as I felt I reasonably could. After all, there's no two ways about it. Talking about privilege is deeply divisive for many people. I wish we could all have open and candid conversations about it without the potential of things breaking down. And despite my personal wishes, this can happen. We still have to cover it. There is no equity without discussing privilege. Whether it is the first thing we talk about or the last, it is essential. Fortunately, we already have been discussing privilege, just more indirectly. Remember when we talked about what we consider normal and not? There's privilege in that. So too with objectiveness. Some people's work styles falling under mainstream ideas of objectivity, and others not so much. Power? That hits on privilege. Whose history is covered? How is it covered? How do we use the histories we've heard to make decisions about tomorrow? You got it. There's privilege there too. To be upfront, we're not going to go as far with this topic as we can. I make this choice because this is an asynchronous video, and for many of us it takes someone present and trained to work through it. What we will do is take a bird's eye view, look at it from above, and talk about privilege in general terms. As for personal reflection of our individual privilege, that will be the optional exercise, something we can choose to do on our own time, can choose to do it on our own, or facilitate it. With where we are right now, with our goal to move from interest to action, at minimum, we need to allow conversations of privilege to happen. We must at minimum hold on to our balance and not get in the way to let others speak about it even if we ourselves are not ready yet. Talking about privilege, both having lots of it and very little of it, can be messy. That's okay. Some things are meant to. Rainbows after rain, after all. We'll hit on the 5 points made in the guidebook. Privilege hits people hard. Many do not welcome being told that they have it easier than others. Once again, bird's eye view. We know the nature of privilege is difficult. It's uncomfortable. It hurts. It requires a degree of resilience to patch up our wounds and keep moving forward. I'll give an example that hits home for myself. Those of us with more privileges have an easier time even when it comes to engaging with equity. I've had a lot of people tell me how they think it must be hard for me as a cisgender white guy to talk about equity. In truth, I've seen the opposite. I mean, there are standards to be sure, but for those of us with privilege who decide to pursue equity, the path is shorter and less steep than for many people I've met. It's a tough truth to swallow, and it's a truth that I need to live with in order to do the work myself. Privilege is hard to wrap our heads around, as it is often less about opportunities than it is a lack of barriers. It is like describing the empty space in an open door. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that privilege is a tangible thing, handed to us on a literal silver platter, but it's usually not how it plays out. For example, parking. If we have a covered garage at work and at home, we don't have to worry about a hailstorm during the day. This is assuming we even have a space to park in at all, and aren't parked on the street navigating local ordinances of where we can park and not and for how long. And that's even assuming we have a car and don't have to worry about public transportation and walking on foot through the heat and the cold. In this case, the privilege is less about the garage than it is about the lack of hardship, the obstacles, the indignities that each additional layer of less parking, less transportation, less flexibility in the commute brings. Privilege does not exist in a vacuum. It amplifies the success from hard work and good fortune. It mitigates the repercussions for mistakes and bad luck. Yes, we did work hard for what we have. Yes, some others have made mistakes to have less. When we talk about privilege, we're not ignoring personal choice or responsibility, Privilege is attached to it, exists alongside it. Say some good fortune comes and everyone's getting a 5% merit-based raise. Let's do some math. The front-end worker making, say, $35,000 a year, that 5% is $1,750. How about our higher-end manager making $120,000? 5% is now $6,000. Same good fortune, but not really. Someone got a better deal. What about the flip side? Mandatory layoffs. Employees who for no fault of their own lose their job. How often do we hear about top executives who get a hefty severance? How often do we hear about that for the frontline staff? And even if they do, once again, who's getting more? In this way, we see how earning more, being in a higher position, snowballs into greater and greater opportunity and has better protection from hardship. An irony of privilege is that it hides itself. To be privileged is also to be given the benefit of the doubt, to be accepted and not questioned, and therefore not need to reflect. The more privileged we are, the less that we are forced to see privilege in our day-to-day lives. That is because being privileged is in large part to be accepted, to be allowed to just be ourselves, and not be expected to conform to stereotypes or conform to practices and beliefs that aren't our own. A quick example here is in our day-to-day. Are we trusted, or do we have to fight for every inch of what we're trying to accomplish? To grapple with privilege requires not only learning about what it means, but also unlearning mainstream beliefs that state everyone has a fair chance. We'll get more into learning and unlearning in the next section. For now, know that to get into the topic of privilege, it's not just a matter of learning new information. We also have to give up some preconceived beliefs. Here's a historical example for us. In the Declaration of Independence, the line was that all men were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the Constitution, it was changed to life, liberty, and property. The pursuit of happiness has never been constitutional. It is not something that is legally valued near as much as our personal property, whether it brings us happiness or no. In this example, we are on one hand learning about the elevated state of property, and on the other hand, unlearning the idea that the pursuit of happiness is as high as we thought it was. Summarizing what we've looked at now, we know that privilege is difficult emotionally, and is meant to in many cases. It is also difficult cognitively. It takes some real critical thinking to reflect about the ins and outs of it. It takes time and intention to understand. We don't figure out all of our privileges in one sitting. We observe and identify over time as we face new situations and circumstances that go easier or harder than it does for others. And of course, even to speak about privilege is to challenge it, since it naturally passes itself off as normal in society. It doesn't have to be, though, and we can and should speak up. That's a step in the right direction. As I mentioned, our optional exercise is to start accepting our own privilege. Guilt doesn't help because guilt makes it about us when we're trying to uplift others. We have to be strong. We have to be humble and let others' voices be elevated above our own. Before trying to navigate anyone else's privilege, we start with ourselves. Remember, we can't change the past, can't immediately switch off how society engages with us. We do determine what comes next. To go full circle, we focused on the way things currently are. We didn't get into many specifics because the current state will differ for each of us, for our organizations, for our communities. Our cautionary tale for this section is that once again we are challenging norms. Many people in positions of authority aren't keen to reward those of us who question and challenge the status quo that they feel is their duty to uphold. We have taken the base fundamentals from the introduction section and applied them to think of our current state intuitively on what is normal and not, and professionally, such as our definition of objectiveness. We've delved into power both in theory and in application, and we've witnessed some of the real challenges of engaging with equity, both with history and privilege, and how understanding the current state is its own form of resistance. And this concludes the current state. We now pivot to the third and the longest section of the guidebook, self. Now that we've gotten down some of the fundamentals, now that we've figured out some of the way things are with a fresh perspective, we're prepped to move on to the part where we start to do something about it all. That first thing is us. Next video on self-awareness.